Going on, everybody? This is D back again with another movie video. This time this is a movie versus movie type video. I'm going to pit the Batman versus the Dark Knight. Gonna judge these two movies against each other based off of 11 categories, pretty much in the same vein as the Hollow Man versus the Invisible Man video that I did a while back. And whichever, at the end of the whole, 11 categories, whichever film has picked up the most wins, the most points, that will be the film that I'll pretty much kind of consider the better movie. But I will forewarn you, kind of a spoiler alert, I want to soften the blow for when it happens. There is one tie in this situation. One of these categories, the two films tie each other, but I do think it's justified, and I do think I will be able to adequately explain why the tie occurred. So the categories are Batman, Bruce Wayne, main villain, secondary villain, Gotham City, musical score, supporting characters, fight scenes, action scenes. I do think there's a difference between those. I know people might think that's kind of the same thing. In my opinion, it's not. Bat vehicles, and then finally story. The story graphic here looks a little different than the others because I actually had to kind of put that in last minute because I missed it on the first go around when I created this little graphic here. So that's why it might look a little off. But anyway, so let's go ahead and start. Which film do I think has the better Batman? And for me, I'm going to have to go with the Batman. I'm just doing a little, this looks kind of cheap and everything, and I guess it is kind of low budget, but I'm just doing little marks, just a simple to show where the point goes to. Yeah, I say the Batman for this one. I liked Robert Pattinson's portrayal of the Batman more than Christian Bale's. I think by the time the second movie got going and just really got into the thick of it, and by the second movie I'm talking about The Dark Knight, by the time The Dark Knight got going, I was able to accept and even in moments appreciate Christian Bale's Batman. But I overall always thought there was something a little bit off and something just a little bit kind of funny and even goofy in moments about Christian Bale's Batman. I never really liked his voice. In fact, at least in the very first film, Batman Begins, I really hated his voice. It was really, I remember after seeing the Batman Begins, it kind of bothered me that I was going to have to deal with that bat voice for the rest of however many Batman films they were going to do at the time that Batman Begins came out. Now, of course, The Dark Knight was a really good movie, and I feel like he had kind of maybe toned down the voice a little bit in The Dark Knight, or just The Dark Knight was so good that it made me kind of forget about his bat voice. But on the other side, I think Robert Pattinson has one of the best Batman voices in live action movies. Actually, I've always liked Michael Keaton's Batman voice, and I think Robert Pattinson's is very kind of similar to Michael Keaton's Batman voice in terms of just the delivery and how it actually sounds. Not overly forced, but it does sound different. It's clear he's changed, the sound is changing. There's a clear distinction between Batman's voice and Bruce Wayne's voice, but there's just something very kind of nonchalant and not so try hard about Michael Keaton and Robert Pattinson's bat voice. And I appreciate the gear as well. I like the kind of new, rather different, unique take on Batman's suit in the Batman, the whole collar type thing going on with the cape. I had never seen that before as it pertains to Batman, so I really kind of liked just something different, a different kind of just look to things. So just overall, as it stands now, I just think Robert Pattinson actually had the better live action Batman, so point goes to the Batman. Next up we have Bruce Wayne. I'm gonna make this kind of quick. I'm gonna go with The Dark Knight for the better Bruce Wayne. Now, I don't actually have any issues with Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne. I know some people did. A lot of people, or at least some people, felt it was kind of a quote-unquote emo Bruce Wayne, and I can maybe kind of see why some might say that. Some of the whole kind of emo looking vibe to it is actually kind of justified because, well, he's always grieving. So if you're, in a state of grieving and anger, your kind of emotional disposition is going to come off kind of emo. And then the whole black eye paint thing, it's functional. We know why he has that because of the way it works with the cowl. So, it just as a kind of a side effect, aesthetically, he might look kind of emo, but we also do understand the usefulness of that black eye paint. So that kind of, to me, negates the emo energy to a certain degree. But anyways, Christian Bale's portrayal of Bruce Wayne is a lot more traditional in terms of what we're used to. Bruce Wayne kind of really playing up the billionaire playboy, I'm driving sports cars and flirting with, the models and all that type of stuff. That very braggadocious, cocky, flirtatious billionaire playboy image. That's what Christian Bale was putting on a lot in The Dark Knight, and it made sense because that's really traditionally, at least if you go by a lot of the comics and even some of the animated series stuff, that's often the face that Bruce Wayne has put on. So I will say the Dark Knight's particular portrayal of Bruce Wayne was more closer to what I was used to traditionally than Robert Pattinson's portrayal, even though I did not have an issue with Robert Pattinson's portrayal. I'm going to actually give the point to The Dark Knight just for, being close, very accurate to what I've traditionally seen in comics and in other media. All right, next up we have main villain. Obviously, this is going to go to The Dark Knight. You can't really beat Heath Ledger's Joker, and actually Heath Ledger's Joker and just that whole performance. On a side note, of course, I always got to mention this yellow box that pops up. That's just me checking my focus and everything. But anyway, so obviously Heath Ledger's Joker, great, and I do think his Joker is a big part of what makes The Dark Knight as good as it is, because, low key, there are actually a lot of kind of problems and issues I have with The Dark Knight, but the effectiveness of Heath Ledger's Joker really just cradles and supports, and gives a foundation to the film that keeps the film strong, even in its moments where I do think it might have a few kind of problems. All right, so that goes to The Dark Knight. Now, okay, obviously The Dark Knight is up to an early lead. Next up, we have secondary villain. Now, secondary villain in The Dark Knight, to me, the secondary villain was ultimately Two-Face. In the Batman, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to say Penguin is the secondary villain. But you could also say, and I do understand if people have this opinion because it does make total sense, you could also argue that Falcone is the secondary villain. In fact, from a story perspective and just, where Batman and even Catwoman, where their kind of energy is kind of placed, it's more towards Falcone being the actual secondary villain in the Batman. But for the purposes of kind of name recognition and just Batman lore, to me, Penguin qualifies as a secondary villain as well. And here's the thing, no matter which way you go, whether you go Falcone or you go the Penguin, I do think the Batman has the better secondary villain. I was not a fan of Two-Face in The Dark Knight. I didn't really like his portrayal, and at the very least, I thought they ran through his arc way too quick. Like, Two-Face is the type of character, to me, he's on the same level as, obviously the Joker is kind of the top dog in terms of Batman rogue gallery, Batman villains, but to me Two-Face is in the same class as someone like the Riddler or someone like the Penguin. I remember back when I was young watching Batman the Animated Series, I was always excited when an episode came on that was going to be a Two-Face centered episode. He was always I always thought there was something cool about him, and he was a villain that they used multiple times, but they didn't overuse him. So they used him very sparingly, so sparingly that whenever a Two-Face episode popped up, it kind of stood out. It was actually like kind of an exciting moment, just because I just liked that villain back then. So I've always had a higher view of Two-Face than it seems kind of other people do in terms of where you rank him as a villain. And I just didn't like the way The Dark Knight actually handled him, from the aesthetic to what they did with him in the film and how quick they did it, how quickly he was kind of, dispatched of, basically, or disposed of. So secondary villain point goes to the Batman. Now, Gotham City. This is very easy. Gotham City point goes to the Batman as well. I like for my Gotham City, because I am, a longtime fan of Tim Burton's Gotham Cities. I like my Gotham City to have a character to it. It needs to be a character, almost an entity to itself, an entity on its own. Christopher Nolan really just used, I guess it was Chicago, just basic, realistic, to the point of where it's clearly just Chicago or New York or whatever. Just not a lot of creativity and unique to Gotham type character was brought to the city in Christopher Nolan's Batman films. With the Batman, Gotham has a character like presence to it. It has a unique look to it. It looks like Gotham, or at least a version of Gotham City. It doesn't look like just any other major city that you can find. They utilized multiple different locations and put them all together to create Gotham. So they filmed footage in America, but they also filmed footage overseas in Europe. So you get this mishmash of architecture, looks, and just overall moods, and it creates a just much more potent Gotham City. So Gotham City goes to the Batman. Musical score also is going to go to the Batman. I think his name was Michael Giacchino. I'm going to put his name up in the edit to make sure I get it right, because I don't think I'm pronouncing it right. I know it's Michael Giacchino or Michael something. I'm gonna quit saying it because I think I'm saying it wrong. But the composer for the Batman musical score did a great job. I think that's the better score. The Dark Knight's score isn't bad. When I first saw The Dark Knight, I didn't have any issues with the music. The music actually was fairly good. At least it was good enough to support the film. In retrospect, and as years pass, I will say, of all the Batman musical scores, I think those, I believe it was Hans Zimmer that did the Dark Knight music score. I think that the Hans Zimmer score is actually the most underwhelming. This is an easy choice for me. Musical score point goes to the Batman. Next up, we have supporting characters. This is actually a fairly close one, because I don't really have issues with any of the supporting characters in either film. And all the supporting characters in both films are strong and strongly performed by the actors that portray them. You have Jeffrey Wright, who I liked quite a bit as Gordon in the Batman, but I also didn't really have any major issues with Gary Oldman's Gordon in The Dark Knight. Though I will say he was a little kind of he was a lot more of a empathetic, I guess, maybe that's the right word to use, maybe not, but he was a little bit more of a tender, I'll use that word. Yeah, he is a little bit more of a tender Gordon than Jeffrey Wright's Gordon. And I kind of appreciated Jeffrey Wright's Gordon more, but Gary Oldman did a great job in terms of just his acting performance. And look, he was a part of a successfully completed 3-film, he was a part of a trilogy, and he did a great job at it. So he gets his due for that. Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman, I thought was a great character in The Dark Knight. And also, for clarification, by supporting characters, I'm not using any villains or criminals, bad guys or whatever as a part of the supporting characters. I actually mean literally supporting characters that are there kind of to support Batman and what he's trying to do. So just basically other kind of slightly smaller rolled good guys. So you have Gary Oldman as Gordon. You have Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. You can throw in. Well, I gotta stick with The Dark Knight. I almost talked about Catwoman from Dark Knight Rises. But yeah, so you have, and then I guess Aaron Eckhart through half of The Dark Knight is a supporting character as well for Batman. And you can go into Maggie Gyllenhaal and whatnot, and then of course Michael Caine as very memorable Alfred. But I've always said all the Alfreds in all the Batman films have been likable and well portrayed. You go over to the Batman, and for the Batman's supporting characters, you're gonna have, of course, Jeffrey Wright as Gordon. You have Andy Serkis, who does well as Alfred, and then of course you have Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman. I'm gonna give the supporting characters point to The Dark Knight, and this is it's kind of me throwing The Dark Knight a bone in a way, because I don't necessarily know for a fact that overall I like The Dark Knight supporting characters better than the Batman. I don't completely know that, but when it's hard for me to make a decision, I tend to go with what's been kind of cemented and proven and doesn't necessarily have a tremendous amount of flaws to really change my mind drastically. So I'm going to go ahead and give supporting characters points to The Dark Knight. Next up, we have fight scenes. This is actually relatively easy for me. Fight scenes point goes to the Batman. There's actually more, if I remember correctly, there's more hand-to-hand fight scene action in the Batman than there is in The Dark Knight. And I also do remember kind of being disappointed overall with Batman and his fighting ability in the Christopher Nolan films. That left a lot to be desired when it came to the hand-to-hand fight scenes in the Christopher Nolan films. The best fight scene in any of the Christopher Nolan Batman films is and I might have got out of focus here. Let me check. I'm checking my phone. Hit the mic too. Checking my focus. Okay, maybe I'm all right. But anyway, so the best hand-to-hand fight scene in any of the Christopher Nolan films is the first Bane fight, and that was more so because of the dramatics around it and the drama and suspenseful nature of it. Wasn't actually so impressive, just the actual choreography. Even though it was a very slow, kind of methodical fight. Or beatdown rather, I guess that still is a part of choreography. But the Bane fight from The Dark Knight Rises was carried and bolstered mostly by the suspense and the drama of the moment, not necessarily being a truly impressive display of hand-to-hand fighting. So I got to give the hand-to-hand fight scene situation to the Batman. Now, action scenes. Now, like I said, some people might view them kind of one and the same thing in a way. To me, fight scenes are literally just that, a fight scene, typically hand-to-hand or melee in some form. That can change, I guess, in superhero, superpower having type films where people are shooting projectiles and all that type of stuff. But like typically fight scene, I'm talking about literally hand-to-hand melees, or at least melee style fighting. Action scenes, I'm talking about foot chases, car chases, just any type, skydiving, literal action type scene that's beyond actual hand-to-hand combat. So, and with that in mind, I hesitantly, but will go ahead and do it, give the point to The Dark Knight. Now, one of the reasons I'm able to give this to The Dark Knight is because The Dark Knight does have a number of set pieces that I can point to, set pieces and moment sequences that I can point to that I really, really liked, or at the very least are really just worth, keep hitting the mic, but that are very, worthy of recognition. The Batman, that car chase scene with the Batman chasing down the Penguin is very strong to me, and it stands out just very strongly in my mind. But then after that, actual just true to form action sequences, when I think of the Batman, I actually don't think of that many. I mean, you can go to when he kind of takes flight, getting out of the police station or whatever. That is very strong, but then The Dark Knight can match that or counter that, because Batman has a very strong and to me very kind of underrated sequence where he kind of glides as well. When I think it's when he goes to get I can't think of the guy's name, but he has to go get somebody and bring him back to America, or bring him back to Gotham City, and he kind of flies through the window and all this type of stuff. But anyway, so the Dark Knight has its own kind of gliding sequence that is very impressive and visually striking and dynamic as well. And if you think about how the city is lit at night, with all the kind of high rises lit up and glowing at night, and everything else is dark, and Batman just kind of quietly gliding and floating around these skyscrapers, and then he crashes into this window to get this guy and bring him back. From a visual perspective, you could argue The Dark Knight, that sequence looked even better than some of the very similar sequence in the Batman. Also, The Dark Knight has the whole sequence with the Joker and the semi getting tipped over, and Joker stumbling out of the tipped over truck, still firing his gun as he's falling into the ground, just very haphazardly wild and chaotic, which is obviously befitting for the Joker. And just that whole scene where Batman's on the I guess they called it the Bat Pod, and he's kind of playing chicken with Joker. Just that whole sequence is very strong stuff there. And then of course towards the beginning of The Dark Knight, when he had the whole encounter with Scarecrow and them trying to do that deal in that parking garage, and then Batman shows up and he eventually does the superhero landing on top of the van, crushing the roof of the van. Just a very cool looking quick moment. So very strong action scene type moments in The Dark Knight. I actually just have to give this to The Dark Knight. I gotta kind of be fair about these things. So there it is. Action scenes goes to The Dark Knight. Next up, we have Bat vehicles, and this is, in case you haven't been able to figure it out quite yet, this is the one where we're gonna have a tie here. Both the Batman and The Dark Knight get a score on this because they both have vehicles that are better than that same version of the vehicle in the other film. Now, what I mean by this is, in The Dark Knight, you have, of course, the Tumbler, which is kind of basically Christopher Nolan's Batmobile, and then you also have the Bat Pod, which is basically Christopher Nolan's version of a Bat bike of some sort, a bat motorcycle of some sort, but they just call it the Bat Pod. And the way it does function differently than a motorcycle in terms of how the wheels maneuver and whatnot. But and then in the Batman, you have basically a very traditional looking motorcycle, basically, if you want to call it the Bat bike or whatever. Names aren't really used in the movie, so just call it the Bat bike, I guess. And then you also have the Batmobile. I like the Batmobile in the Batman better than the Tumbler in The Dark Knight, but I like the Bat Pod in The Dark Knight better than the Bat bike in the Batman. So hence we get the tie. Both films do something from a vehicular standpoint. They do something better than the other film does, the same kind of vehicle. I think you get what I'm saying, and I keep hitting this mic here. I don't know how it's affecting the sound, but My apologies, but you get what I'm saying here. So bat vehicles, we actually get a tie there, and I do think that's a justified tie right there. Now, next up in last category, we have story. I don't really have any major issues with the Dark Knight story. I mean, obviously, I have issues with the way things occurred with Two-Face, but just for the purposes of the movie overall, I don't have any just major issues with the Dark Knight story. But the Batman is going to win this point because it really dove deep into a genre that I'm a big fan of, and that is that dark detective noir type energy. I really like that. That's just just almost it's almost hypnotic in a way. There's something where it just really kind of pulls you in, and I had never seen that style truly tackled with a live action Batman movie. Once again, I have not been paying attention to what my camera is doing, so I don't know if I've been out of focus or not. But anyway, so so just that whole detective noir energy is just I'm really into that, and I'd never seen it truly tackled in a Batman movie before like it was in the Batman. So that just really kind of captivated me, more so than the actual story of The Dark Knight did, which was a well done story, but it was still very just kind of traditional Batman movie fare to a certain degree. The Batman, that whole story and just style of story was something that was very new in terms of live action Batman movies, and that really won me over. So that the story point goes to the Batman. Now, clearly, if you just look at the notches, it was a relatively competitive matchup. I mean, both movies got some points, but it's clear that the Batman wins this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points plus the tie. The Dark Knight just gets 1, 2, 3, 4 points plus the tie. So clearly kind of a close enough competitive matchup, but the Batman gets the edge there here. And there are some things here where, give it enough thought, maybe I could go the other way. Like I said, the supporting characters, that's a close one because I don't actually have any issues with the supporting characters from the Batman either, but it's just kind of like when it's very close like that and I'm not quite sure where to go, I tend to lean towards the kind of cemented proven the proven movie, the proven cast. So I just lean that way. Action scenes was kind of a similar thing where I really do like a lot of things in the Batman, but the fact of the matter is it's not as much of an action movie as The Dark Knight is. It's much more of a very detective, almost murder mystery / horror type film than The Dark Knight is. So just almost by default, plus The Dark Knight has some very memorable scenes, almost by default The Dark Knight has to win the action scenes category. And very interestingly enough, the same thing that kind of gives The Dark Knight the win on the action scenes category also kind of gives the Batman the win on the story side of things, because it has a different type of live action Batman story, being more detective, murder mystery, horror type focused. So just kind of interesting how that goes. But that's it, you guys. This is the video. The Batman, I'm going to say it, is better than The Dark Knight overall to me, in my opinion. You got to use all the little words that makes it okay to have that makes it okay to have an opinion without pissing somebody off. In my opinion, to me, for me. All right, you guys, that is it. I will catch you on the next go round.